It was just reported that more than 1 billion people are now watching podcasts on YouTube every month. That is absolutely wild.
It's a whole new world out there.
It's a different world.
Podcasts are more culturally relevant than they've ever been, and with that, something interesting is happening. Because journalism popularized the formal published interview format as we recognize it today, a lot of your favorite podcasters often get deemed journalists, or at least get asked about how they think about journalism, regardless of if they've ever claimed that role.
Do you think of yourself as a journalist then in a way?
Did you study media, journalism, anything like that?
There's a lot of people who refer to us as journalists. And I get very uncomfortable with that.
So, as traditional media struggles to keep up with independent, personality-driven media in the attention economy, a question that arises is, are podcasters replacing journalists? The other month I received an email from Mike Isaac, a New York Times journalist, which said, I found it interesting to see the rising trend of CEOs and major tech figures going direct to audience via long-form podcast interviews with folks like Dwarkesh Patel, Lex Fridman, and I believe yourself as well. In other words, doing sit-downs with folks outside of the establishment media sphere, meaning companies like my employer. I'd love to get your thoughts on why you think it's working, or is a strategy on the tech company's part, and what folks like yourself have to offer that traditional media does not, as well as what got you interested in doing it in the first place. There's so much to say about the current state of podcasting, and I'm very excited to talk about this as someone who, like Mike mentioned, is within this new sphere, but not only that, I'm also very excited to talk about this as someone who is 4 things. 1, often deemed a journalist, even though I never initially set out to be, and while I prioritize the practice and principles of journalism, still wouldn't deem myself that today. 2, a power consumer of podcasts, and someone who credits them for exposing me to information that changed my perspective and life for the better, especially in 2018, 2019. Around then, Rogan, H3, and so on were my goats. 3, deeply intuitively curious about the evolution of media, and I have a lot of feedback on the current role that podcasts play within our information ecosystem. And lastly, 4, chronically online. So we're about to bring in a lot of the biggest names in podcasting into this conversation. Let's start by laying out the prominence of podcasts among people of power right now. It's a lot of peace, prominence, podcasts, people, power, but we're going to do that, though we're also going to talk about them from more of an entertainment standpoint as well. Elon Musk was the first tech billionaire to go on podcasts and share his train of thought through multiple hours of conversation at a time. His first appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience was in 2018. Today, we see other tech billionaires putting themselves in front of a mic to chat with people who garnered an audience through consistency and typically following their curiosities. When Mark Zuckerberg started to undergo his public image rebrand in 2022, one of his first moves was to go on independent podcasts. In terms of politics, leading up to the 2020 election, Andrew Yang was the first presidential candidate who utilized podcasts to skyrocket their exposure, which made him go from a complete political outsider with little to no public figure relevancy to garnering millions upon millions of views and ranking as high as 3rd among 2020 Democratic candidates. Leading up to the 2024 election, candidates like Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., and others used this strategy as a blueprint for their campaigns. While the 2024 election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris was anticipated to be a TikTok election due to the platform's growing power, along with heightened emotions around a looming ban of the app in the US, podcast and streams, so the umbrella of long-form conversations, actually ended up being the media format that played the most culturally prominent role. Like this clip is historic.
I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk Boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, Bustin' with the Boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan. And thank you, America. Thank you. Have a good night.
It is crystal clear that independent media's role and new media's role is only growing. So, to respond to that, in January 2025, the White House introduced a new media seat in the press room.
We're also opening up this briefing room to new media voices who produce news-related content and whose outlet is not already represented by one of the seats in this room. We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. And you can apply now on our new website, whitehouse.gov/new media. Starting today, this seat in the front of the room, which is usually occupied by the press secretary's staff, will be called the new media seat. My team will review the applications and give credentials to new media applicants who meet our criteria and pass United States Secret Service requirements to enter the White House complex.
The first person to have the opportunity to be in the seat was indeed a podcaster.
This White House has received more than 10,000 submissions from individuals across the country who are eager to join all of you. We might have to make this room a little bit bigger to do that, who want to participate in our new media seat at a future briefing. So in this seat today, we have the Ruthless podcast. They humbly started by entertaining small audiences on Capitol Hill, but after 4 years, this program has become one of the most influential podcasts in America. They previously reached #1 on the charts and earned over 25 million downloads as they deliver political news with a humorous touch. The hosts are Josh Holmes, Michael Duncan, Comfortably Smug, and the man joining us today, John Ashbrook. So with that, I will take your questions. John, please kick us off.
Thank you very much. Caroline, in your first briefing, the media went after this administration.
According to Vox, a little more than a decade ago, slightly more than a tenth of Americans reported listening to a podcast in a given month. That number has since quadrupled to nearly half of the American population over the age of 12, according to Edison Research's Infinite Dial Media Survey in 2024. Also in that article, it's mentioned that, according to Pew Research, a huge share, 87%, believe that what they're hearing on podcasts is mostly accurate. A third say they trust this information to be more accurate than what they get from other sources. These levels of trust are astounding, especially compared to trust in news from mainstream media. And yet, these kinds of shows don't necessarily have the same kind of editorial oversight or infrastructure as traditional news organizations to do fact-checking and verify the claims and narratives they're spreading. As someone who benefits from these stats, I agree. These stats are astounding in both positive and negative ways. Because let's go back to that point I made earlier about being someone who is often deemed a journalist, even though I never initially set out to be and still wouldn't deem myself that today. Because I am by no means alone in that. In fact, it is the common experience among media personalities right now.
Did you study media, journalism, anything like that?
I took a journalism class in community college.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're like the epitome of like the new media. You have, like you said, you took one class in college. You've never been a journalist, but you run one of the most popular interview shows out there.
Like, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of people who refer to us as journalists. And I get very uncomfortable with that.
Why?
I never set out to be a journalist. I think even in like some of the concepts of what I know about journalism, I'm just like, I'm a storyteller. I'm like a storyteller. I produce a show. I'm a creator. I'm much more comfortable with those terms than I am journalist. I don't know what it is about that, but I have like a uncomfortable relationship with that word.
Do you consider yourself an educator? What are the words that you like?
Yeah, I think educator is part of it, but like, I think there's also discomfort of like, I set out 13 years ago on this path to become a filmmaker. And that has taken twists and turns. And like, there's been a lot of opportunities to filmmake. But like landing in this position was just kind of unexpected and just through the twists and turns of the career. And so I think that's also part of it is like, that's not part of my own narrative of myself. And yeah, I also think, relationship with like trust and
I definitely don't introduce myself as an educator though.
No,
I go out the gates with podcaster.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as a journalist then in a way, or do you think of yourself as an entertainer? Because the other reason I mention this is I think that there's this sort of interesting cross thing happening. And I don't know, to be honest, because I grew up as a traditional journalist, I can't tell if I think this is healthy or not.
Yeah. I think it's so healthy, first of all. No, I consider myself Alex Cooper. I don't care if people consider me a journalist or a podcaster or just a girl that talks online every week. I know what I'm doing is changing a lot of lives, and I know a lot of women specifically have been extremely impacted by the conversations I'm having. So if you want to put me in the box of a journalist who just interviewed the Vice President of the United States, sure, put me there. But I'm fine with podcaster too.
Let me preface this with, I like Alex Cooper. A handful of the Call Her Daddy episodes have been extremely beneficial for me in the midst of relationship experiences, life as a woman, and so on. With that being said, her response to that question was irresponsible and sent literal shivers down my spine. Because Alex Cooper is a business person, among other things, but in terms of her role in media, she is currently and has been an entertainer who will style shift into some of the principles of journalism when she sees fit, but she is not a journalist. To be clear, I don't think she was being ill-intended. It's just obvious she doesn't fully understand what a journalist is. And that is zero hate, zero shade, because I had to look up the definition of a journalist a few years ago when people started to deem me one. That is the reality for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people don't actually know what a journalist or what journalism truly is. But we'll get there shortly. As you just saw, the misconception, or at least the questioning, of if a wider array of media personalities are now considered journalists today isn't just coming from consumers. It's also coming from traditional journalists themselves. Because it's like, look, people in power and public figures at large are having these conversations they used to have with us with these media personalities instead. So does that mean we are the same now? The answer to that question is fundamentally no, but that doesn't mean you're not in competition today. Because you're playing within the same media/information ecosystem. You're also playing under the same incentives within the attention economy, with eyeballs, advertisers, subscriptions, and so on. So, in today's video, I have 3 goals. 1, to get people to stop considering media personalities journalists who never claim to take on that role, even if you're only subconsciously giving them that role because you just give them most of your time. 2, full context into the positioning and incentives of podcasts, making them culturally powerful. And 3, to get us to reflect, promise it'll be good, to get us to reflect and better compartmentalize the rigorous information sources versus the entertaining information sources in our lives. Again, might sound boring, it's not, I promise. I'm going to do all this by defining what journalism is, sharing how it does and doesn't relate to the rise of podcasts, dissecting the current role of podcasts in our information ecosystem, curating clips across the internet that I find most interesting for you to consider, and noting what to have in mind moving forward. Because, y'all,
podcasting has ruined the state of journalism. I don't care if the person is Hassan Piker, Joe Rogan, or anyone in between. You should not be getting all your political knowledge and opinions from an online content creator.
Do you think that legacy journalism is probably on its way out?
It's on its way out and it's being replaced by a worse machine.
And what is that? Just algorithms?
No, algorithmic clickbait journalists who are masquerading as independent reporters who are just literally following the exact same incentive structure of the mainstream media. Outrage, clickbait thumbnails, false light, selective interviewing, manipulative. It's crazy.
This topic is wildly relevant, and with brain rot being so accurately deemed the 2024 Oxford Word of the Year, while it's very hee-hee ha-ha, it's also something we low-key feel imprisoned by. And don't get it twisted, I love me some entertainment. I love brain rot media, but with that being said, I also love the other end of the spectrum. And that end of the spectrum is diminishing because people, maybe sometimes we, are letting entertaining sources, solely entertaining sources, play both roles in their lives and completely dominate the attention economy. So today, we're going to make it fun to think about changing that. Do you hear the police? They're coming to get us. They're coming to get us. But before we dive in, I am very excited to introduce this video's partner because they bring together art, culture, and accessibility to what's currently at the forefront of both of those things. Death to Stock is a platform that you can use to 1, get a concise distillation of the current culture, and 2, obtain photos and videos that bring these trends to life so you can use them in your own storytelling. While the company has a small team, they're loved by iconic brands like Nike, Apple, Universal, Pinterest, and more, all of which are known for their high-quality taste in visuals, which Death to Stock only adds to. When becoming a member, you not only get access to 500 new visuals each month, but you also get access to the gallery of over 10,000 plus previous visuals. And as we can see here, they're truly putting death upon what we've perceived to be stock visuals in the past, which have a bad rep. We don't think of them as too cute. Let's search the term digital on a generic stock image website. I don't know if I need to say anything. We both have eyes. Now, let's search the term digital on Death to Stock. The difference is clear. You can become a member today with my code JULES15 for 15% off 12 months, and you can cancel anytime, but I'm super excited to see you take your storytelling and projects to a whole new level. Now, let's get into the video. Before we start, I have 2 disclaimers. First, at no point in this video am I ever talking from some high horse and saying that I've never been guilty or never will be guilty of anything mentioned. I'm just looking at the landscape, and as someone who is both in it and observes it, I'm telling you how it is. Second, my favorite reminders, there are chapters, though I don't think you really need to pay attention to them much because I intricately curated this, so try to stay in order. But second, you can up the playback speed. This is a longer video, but it's valuable all the way through, I promise. But I'm a 2X girl, so I will not judge you for that. Do what you need to do to get this information through the skull. Okay, getting into things, let's start by laying out what a journalist and what journalism actually is. This will make the fun topics later on that much more eye-opening. You can't necessarily pinpoint when journalism started because it's governed by a series of acts, and some of which are very innate to us. Humans have always had a hunger for knowledge and information, so in both wanting to give and receive correct information, essentially the practice of journalism has always been around in some form. But today, let's go directly to the Code of Ethics document from the Society of Professional Journalists. The preamble states, ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity. The Society declares these 4 principles as the foundation of ethical journalism and encourages their use in its practice by all people in media. Oh, hell no. That's not what's happening right now. The 4 principles are 1. Seek truth and report it, meaning ethical journalism should be accurate and fair. Journalists should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information. 2. Minimize harm, meaning ethical journalism treats sources, subjects, colleagues, and members of the public as human beings deserving of respect. 3. Act independently, meaning the highest and primary obligation of ethical journalism is to serve the public. And 4. Be accountable and transparent, meaning ethical journalism means taking responsibility for one's work and explaining one's decisions to the public. So, in practicing all 4 of those principles in tandem, one can accurately claim to be a journalist if they are consistent in doing so, or be deemed someone who is practicing journalism in an isolated moment at least. As previous Vox, now independent journalist Cleo Abrams states here,
I look around and I see a lot of YouTubers doing incredible education about the world at the quality or higher than I am. And I consider their work part of my diet, and I consider themselves serving the function of journalism. I don't want to call someone a journalist if they don't want to be called a journalist, but I do recognize that there are a lot of creators doing incredible work that are serving the function of journalism. And I also think that journalism is not like doctor. It is not like lawyer. It doesn't have a test that you have to pass to take it. There are parts of the world where it does. And it comes with a credential that allows you to do certain things. The United States is not like that. And so if you're doing the actions of journalism every day, I think you can call yourself a journalist, and whether you decide to is up to you.
And as she alluded to, not only in the US, but in most democratic countries with strong free press traditions, there is no formal licensing for journalists. And essentially, we all tap into the principles of journalism here and there, if not often. So to Cleo's point, if you're doing the actions of journalism, keyword every day, meaning prioritizing the 4 principles on that document that we just went over, in tandem and consistently in your published work, then yeah, it would be valid to call yourself a journalist. Now, those 4 principles are pretty broad. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, a lot of the podcasters, content creators I tap into, follow those. But things get more granular, and under each of the 4 principles, there are descriptions which elaborate on them, which is going to knock off a lot of podcasters and content creators. So, to name a few, under Seek Truth and Report It, there are 18 points, but 4 examples are, remember that neither speed nor format excuses inaccuracy, gather, update, and correct information throughout the life of a news story, support the open and civil exchange of views, even views they find repugnant, never deliberately distort facts or context, including visual information. Alright, yeah, just considering those points, a lot of the most popular shows today, especially ones that discuss a wide range of topics multiple times a week, they're already knocked off. Under Minimize Harm, there are 7 points, but 2 examples are realize that private people have a greater right to control information about themselves than public figures and others who seek power, influence, or attention. Weigh the consequences of publishing or broadcasting personal information. Consider the long-term implications of the extended reach and permanence of publication. With how many people get posted without their consent today, these are interesting points. Under Act Independently, there are 5 points, but one example is avoid conflicts of interest, real or perceived, disclosed unavoidable conflicts. A lot of the points under this one are focused on the influence of money. Under be accountable and transparent, there are 5 points, but one example is explain ethical choices and processes to audiences. Encourage a civil dialogue with the public about journalistic practices, coverage, and news content. Hey, we're doing that right now. But again, I don't consider myself a journalist. I called myself that for a short bit of time because it was constantly being put on me. And when you're asked, what do you do? Even from people who see your stuff, they're like, what would you call that? I'm like, I don't know what to call it, so I'm just going to go by what other people are saying. And then I took a second. I was like, is this what I am? Is this what I do? And I realized that the 4 principles of journalism were not always a guiding light with whatever I publish online. Sometimes I want to talk about a complex topic only from my experience. Sometimes I want to emphasize a narrative that I find most interesting or feel most intuitive about. So while I prioritize the practice of journalism because I want to be responsible with the information I share, I don't hold all of my published work to the breadth of journalistic standards. As consumers, I believe we should never deem someone a journalist ourselves. I know humans love overarching labels, so it's easy to compartmentalize things, but our default assumption should just be that we don't know what they are. Despite how well they speak, despite how confident their demeanor, despite how much they love to talk about a single topic, despite how professional they're set, it's a highly regarded responsibility, and I'm not going to force that onto someone if they never said it themselves. That's not to then say that they're trying to deceive you with the information they're sharing if they're not a journalist. Obviously, that's not the case. It's just to say that there might be missing context because they don't have that responsibility of being entirely rigorous with the information they're sharing with you. And if you want to uplift that information, if you want to share it yourself, it's good to check other sources to validate it and potentially get more context. Now, if someone claims to be a journalist or their role within a company is stated as so, it's good to respect that, but it's a trust but verify situation. Don't be afraid to call out whenever they are not following any of the 4 principles, because it happens. We're human.
One of the things that I like about being considered a journalist is that there are rules that people understand. My goal is to abide by those rules. And that means that I issue corrections when I get things wrong, which happens. We're covering complicated things. I do get things wrong. And so I try my best to make sure that people know what the correct information is when I get things wrong. And I don't try and hide that. I try and, issue a correction. I try to, add a comment and pin it. That's part of the practice of journalism.
This is actually a good time to acknowledge that journalists have gotten a bad rep over the years as distrust in the media or traditional media has risen. Critiques of the incentives within legacy/traditional media institutions are valid. So what Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman deemed the 5 filters in their book Manufacturing Consent: ownership, advertising, the media elite, flack, and the common enemy. But that aside, something to note is that the standards journalists are held to are pretty robotic. If that robot had the most pristine, objective, unwavering programming. While it's important for those standards to remain, it's notable that while some aspects of journalism are innate to humans, a lot go against our instincts. Humans are prone to biases, tribalism, cognitive shortcuts, simplified narratives, seeking approval, and good journalism has to have a lot of discipline to push through all of that. And yes, those in the official role of a journalist sometimes mess up. A team can fill the voids and be the helpful checks and balances, so researchers, editors, fact-checkers, and so on, but yes, things can slip through the cracks. That being acknowledged, there is still so much quality journalism that comes out of these institutions and organizations, and their journalism is currently essential for good information to circulate within the online, new, and/or independent media ecosystems as well. These sources use that realm of journalism to bounce off of. Related to this, there's this interesting phenomenon where you'll see a media personality who, vast majority of the time in the past, leaned more casual, entertainment-focused, and/or just irresponsible with what they share, say a few base things, or, get a new high-production set, and all of a sudden, people start to perceive their point of view as more of a rigorous information source versus someone who leans towards being much more of an entertaining information source. Again, just from saying a few base things. Sometimes just one based thing. And then on the other hand, it's kind of the same thing, but it's just a more unfortunate situation where someone who prides themselves on sharing rigorous information the vast majority of the time, so they're then held to this high standard, this high regard, messes up. And especially because of the negative narrative around the media today, the loudest people on the internet want to write off this individual or write off the institution that this individual works for because they got something wrong, instead of just critiquing that single piece of work does not qualify as journalism. Okay, we've been super bunned up. We're going to get chill here in just a sec. Just a little bit more of standard information to get out of the way. Building off of that, when it comes to rigorous information sources versus entertaining information sources, it's a spectrum. And that spectrum is kind of a circle because if you're at either end of the spectrum, it is very volatile and easy to be deemed the other. But what I find more interesting is that people on the entertaining end of the spectrum are in kind of a win-win situation because when they fuck up, they can just be like, hey, I'm some random person that people opted into following, or hey, I'm just a comedian. Meanwhile, people who have worked to be on the rigorous side of the spectrum, if they fuck up, they don't have anything like that to fall back on. And I think this is a big reason why entertainment is taking over the information landscape is because of that safety net. As Neil Postman pointed out about Aldous Huxley's point of view in Brave New World, he feared the truth could then be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Something else Cleo mentioned in that Colin and Samir interview is that
I do think that we should expose creators to the same kinds of scrutiny that we expose journalists to. Like, I do think that trying to be correct matters. And that like some of these expectations that we have of media should be applied to journalists or should be applied to creators because millions and millions of people are watching them.
For example, podcasts like H3, hosted by Ethan Klein, a YouTube goat, or BFFs, hosted by Josh Richards, a Musical.ly and TikTok OG, Brianna Chickenfry, who works for Barstool, grew on TikTok, recently went through a breakup with Zach Bryan, and previously Barstool CEO Dave Portnoy, who was also a host, but now it's just those two. Or The Toast, a daily podcast with the Ostrey sisters. These kinds of podcasts will talk about current events, and while their opinions and commentary are totally their prerogative, when they give the breakdowns of topics before they give their commentary, I often want to pull my hair out. Like the 1H3 producer who typically gives the breakdowns, while I'm sure they're lovely, they're often forgetting really important context when giving those breakdowns or purposely leaving out stuff and bringing things up in a very biased manner, which is just unfortunate because it trickles into the broader conversation among the other hosts and producers because that's how they're introduced to the topic. So while I want to hear the opinions of these different people, it's just like it's tainted from the start because of that. And it's just like, why do that, you know? I believe the podcast is 4 days per week and it spans like 3 hours long each time. Yes, it is someone's fault if that is their main source of information. That is by choice. It's kind of wild, but still, we're just talking about, you know, the quality of information, the incentives, and so on of these really popular shows. Or the BFFs podcast, same thing. Though the host just spoke at the World Government Summit, what could they possibly be talking about? I don't know, but I know on their podcasts, they throw around complete misrepresentations of individuals and information. They come in to record, get handed a stack of papers from producers with topics and some bullet points about them, and then it's off to the misinformation races. While they often only discuss entertainers, still, if you're going to decide to cover something like the story of how someone nearly lost his eye and is dealing with a shit ton of medical bills, all stemming from a collaboration with one of the most well-known YouTubers of our time, you should at least be respectful of getting the facts and severity of the situation straight before talking about it to over 600,000 subscribers. Their video titled Breaking Down the David Dobrik versus Jeff Wittek Drama had viewers taken aback by the lack of due diligence. These guys did not watch Jeff's video at all. Jeff has counter arguments for everything they said. What is on those stupid papers? They got 3 people on the pod and no research. They probably should have watched both of their podcasts before commenting on it. Just saying, you can't just watch clips. This has nothing to do with my opinion on the whole thing. I'm just saying, if you're following the story or leaving comments on who's right or wrong, you should watch that pod as well and get more facts. This isn't juicy internet gossip. This is an extremely sad accident. And look, comment sections are not arbiters of truth, but this was a blatant example of irresponsible reporting. And the commenters aren't even sharing an opinion. They're just being like, this lacks context, which is objective truth. But wait, let's see what they were doing at the World Government Summit.
Well, selfish question. I'm from Forbes. We're the, old school traditional media.
Yeah.
What can we, yeah. What can we learn from what you guys are doing?
I think bringing on people like ourselves to help you guys, if that's either in a way of starting to create, the Gen Z Forbes TikTok account, or if that's bringing in people to give you guys just advice or sit at that table and in those meetings and be able to kind of talk to you guys from, what the youth wants.
So you'll do it?
Yeah, if you want me there.
So you have this, multi-channels. You're, you have the social media, you have podcasts. How do you kind of work out that responsibility you have, and how do you use that platform for your brand, but also for just stuff you care about?
you know, as a brand or things I care about with that, I've always felt like it's really important to just stay authentic, stay myself whenever I'm making an opinion or whenever I'm talking on there. Just go on and speak your own truth, because then no one can ever back you into a corner and get you to feel like what you said was wrong or what you said was a lie or anything like that, or twist your words around. So I always find if you speak your truth and stay authentic, you're gonna do all right.
The message we needed, with the perfect messenger. Now, irresponsible reporting isn't always so obvious, and sometimes not only does the comment section not pick up on it, but sometimes the comment section will actually end up rooting for the unknowingly incorrect narrative that they were delivered. In this case of BFFs, the topic was so out in the open online, so there were a lot of people keeping up with all the puzzle pieces and holding people accountable when it comes to that information, but for the vast majority of the news cycle, that is not the case. Like, watch this recent example.
Kai might have been a dead end for Kamala, but her team pressed on. They have been undeterred. Next, they reached out to another streamer, Ronaldo from FaZe, and that also did not turn out the way that they hoped.
No, Camila Harris, stop hitting my team, you and the Secret Service, to do a stream. I am not doing a stream with any politicians, bro.
Not having it. And it's not even that they just don't want to talk to Kamala.
I'm not an OF creator.
They don't want to be involved. Who can blame them?
How can this girl be a credible news source? This is what I'm talking about when I say stop believing everything you see online. 4.2 million subs. How are people so gullible?
Stable Ronaldo was joking. Kamala's team did not reach out to him. And the clickbait title of Brett Cooper's video was, Kamala Harris is paying OF creators? So that's why he mentioned not being an OF creator. Some of the comments on this clip. So they do no fact checking. I like Brett, but I don't know if I can defend this, and now I'm questioning her credibility. She's not supposed to be a credible news source. It's really just like a talk show / podcast. I wonder what her response was to Ron saying this. There was no response, because media personalities like this don't follow journalistic standards. They don't issue corrections like journalists are supposed to, and they post so much amidst the news cycle that they know things will get buried. While I'm all for brushing things off, moving forward and growing, this has been and continues to be a good chunk of her platform. There are a wide array of examples, but one is when the Daily Wire reported that Disney was offering Johnny Depp $301 million to return to the movie franchise. Brett made a TikTok about it, and again, I didn't watch the trial, but this was a rumor. Who didn't touch the rumor? Legacy Media. Who promoted the rumor like crazy? Daily Wire. But what's important to note here is that a new media organization like the Daily Wire acts like they're so anti-legacy media in terms of issues. That is just not the case at all. Not a single one of the remotely top comments on Brett's original YouTube video corrected her. So if her core audience doesn't care and will continue to up her subscriber count, the attention economy outlook is, hey, no need for me to revisit my attention to it either. Brett Cooper ranked 6th on the podcast charts last week. Also within the top 10 on the charts, we have Candace Owens, who's recently thrown a curveball and become a Wendy Williams variant.
Taylor Swift got booed. I don't think I have ever seen a clip anywhere ever since the dawn of her career of her getting booed. Lend that marketing team to Meghan Markle. Why does she struggle so much with humanity? Listen to me, Blake Lively. Tap out, call uncle right now. She was on my mind. I was on the treadmill this morning and I just kept dancing to Single Ladies.
And to be clear, I'm focusing on these two for their cultural prominence, not their politics. There's just nothing to really point to on the left, for better or worse, that emulates such a thing. So yeah, focusing on them. They used to be with the Daily Wire, which I would consider new media, and now they both went independent in the past year. Again, these types of media personalities lean way more towards being entertaining information sources than rigorous information sources. And that's not a dig. Consume their stuff. I don't care. We all love to consume entertainment. I'm just saying we need to better identify and compartmentalize our information sources, because right now, people's perceptions are super blurry. As we saw in that comment section with Stable Ronaldo and Brett Cooper, people were like, what? She doesn't research? She doesn't fact check? Whatever made you think she did? Just because she's on a professional set? Just because she speaks well? Just because she speaks with confidence? Now, I will say a big part of political messaging is always, seeking truth, fighting for truth. So I get that type of deception. But yeah, you can't be deceived by the flashy visuals, everyone. It's interesting because there was like a debate at the beginning of the internet how much visuals should be involved, like image and video, because it can be way more deceiving. Not that text can't be deceiving and deceptive, but there's much less of a chance. And I do find that personalities like Brett Cooper, Candace Owens, Andrew Tate, not to group all these people together, but I find them far less alluring on a platform like X/Twitter. I'm always like, the fuck? Like sometimes the way Andrew Tate talks, he's just so like conniving and manipulative. You're like, you really believe this? And like, I almost believe it because you believe it. But like on X, Twitter, he like tweets stuff. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, you dumbass? It's like, yes, tone and all that is important, but also deceptive. In a Pew Research study just published among U.S. adults who regularly get news on social media, the first news influencers that came to mind included a lot of these types of personalities that sway entertaining on the spectrum. Or even someone like Kai Cenat, who is so purely entertainment, but because he mentions a current event in passing and his viewers spend so much of their time with him, that is essentially how they might get introduced to a lot of things. Personally, more and more, I've been considering someone like Brett Cooper as more of a lifestyle influencer than like a commentator and news influencer lately. Because while I have my pushback, I think her pocket is talking about her worldview and values. She seems to really be in flow when talking about her experiences being homeschooled, growing up in acting, getting married young, owning a farm, and so on. And those personal experiences are things she weaves in much more and leans on much more than the average commentator. Likely because she's really fucking young. Like, I remember I originally fell into kind of like talking about such a wide range of cultural and world topics, and it's like, I have too much life to live right now. I really don't know that much information about these. Like, I'm captivated by them. I'm curious about them, but I should not be talking about them at this scale. So what did I do? I went more inward. I'm like, all right, I'm good at talking about media, digital world stuff, grew up first generation, so online, all that type of stuff. That's my focus. And again, it's very clear she's really comfortable talking about homeschooling, growing up in acting, living on a farm, these things that sway kind of more lifestyle influencer-y, but it's a bit of a different variant. But truly no ill intent in covering this, because she was thrown into a unique situation under a media company where she garnered an audience really quick and had a ton of pressure to put out a lot of content and talk about a lot of things a lot of the time. So I'm just pointing all of these things out, not to hyper analyze her, but just for like media literacy purposes. And yes, someone like Candace Owens goes down research rabbit holes and can go on hour-long rants, multiple hour-long rants about niche topics, so one might mistake her information as rigorous, but it's often related to whatever narratives she finds most entertaining, not necessarily truth, and certainly not the 4 standard principles of journalism. Some of her favorite topics to cover are critiquing how women dress, the sex work industry, and so on. But regarding incentives, she doesn't say a peep about Kanye, who lately has been the epitome of uplifting what she's against in those domains. And why does she not do that? He culturally boosted her, and she doesn't want to risk being on his bad side. Candace Owens is a commentator and entertainer, not a journalist. One of the most revealing conversations is actually one between her and Joe Rogan in 2018, but 3 disclaimers before we watch a few clips. First, focus less on the topic at hand, which is climate change, and focus more on how her train of thought works. Second, yes, this was 6 years ago. People evolve, people change. I wouldn't pull something like this unless they have the same messaging today, which she does. And 3, from what I've gathered, it seems that Rogan still has the same stance today as he does in this video, but today he is far more vocal about something like feeling human-exacerbated climate change is maybe too loosely credited for any natural disaster. It is so hard for me not to include the full 20 minutes. Please watch it at some point. It is a historical clip to me, but here's the gist.
2014, the vast majority, 87% of scientists, said that human activity is driving global warming, yet only half the American public ascribe to that view. So,
well, what website is
87%, and this is
Scientific American.
Yeah.
Yeah, .com though, like, cause that means it's making money. I don't trust that. If it was a .org, I would probably take that, but this is just a random website, and I don't
Scientific
trust.
American is not necessarily a random website.
Yeah, I don't believe this like at all. Just so you know.
You don't believe it like at all?
I genuinely don't believe it. I know you do, but I genuinely don't believe it.
I believe most of the time the consensus of scientists that are studying the data.
Right.
And so what they're doing is
But do you remember all of the stories that came out about the scientists that said that when they tried to present their evidence to show, like, they were basically just getting shut down at every corner? You can pull that up too. Like, scientists who look up the opposite. Right? Instead of looking for what you're searching for, looking for what you're not looking for.
I didn't search for it. That's what I found when I searched it.
Sorry.
Why have a belief as to whether or not global warming is real or not real?
Because I just find that when things
you don't understand the science.
You are correct.
But why have a belief in it?
Right. So it's not a belief. It's not a belief in it. I don't believe in it.
That's what I'm saying. But you have a belief that it doesn't exist.
Right. Do you feel that you have found in your research that there is something that human beings can do that would change this all around?
It's possible, yes. One of the things that they're figuring out how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and even possibly reuse it. There's all sorts of things that people are trying to do.
I'm not going on college campuses talking about global warming. I don't do that.
Right, but why are you saying that you don't think it exists?
I don't know. Maybe because it got because it got so politicized.
Studies into scientific agreement on human-caused global warming, and look at all the studies. It's between 100% and 91% at the lowest. 91% of one of the studies from 2014.
This is the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Yeah, it's a pretty broad consensus.
Who are they polling? Is it the people that are a part of this? I would have to have someone sit down and convince me that it was real. I personally don't believe it. That's okay.
Why?
It's good to start at a place of not believing something.
No, it's not.
You think you should start with believing everything.
No, it's not believe either or. Not believe yes, not believe no.
Yeah.
But don't say you don't believe.
Yeah.
Learn about it.
Yeah.
Learn about it and then have an opinion. But you're stating this opinion without having any real understanding of what climate science is.
But that's exactly what an opinion is. I'm not going, like I said, if you said that, Candace, you went on to 10,000 college campuses and you said that global warming wasn't real, then we'd have a problem. Mm-hmm. You and I are just having a conversation.
Yeah, but why have an opinion on something that you don't have data about? This is my question. I don't necessarily have an opinion on climate science. I really don't. Because I don't know much about it. But what I do know is that what I've read is that the vast majority of people who study it are in agreement that human beings are affected.
So I just my recall on a lot of things that I read, and this was a while ago. So this is when I first formed my opinion on not believing this, I read a shit ton of articles. Can't recall the data because, like I said, this wasn't something I was super passionate about. It was like somebody posted something, and then I went on like a tear reading about it.
This is something that you can look at. You could look at the data and follow where they're getting this information from, and follow how they're making these conclusions, and follow the vast majority of these brilliant people who study this shit their whole life.
Yeah, exactly. And if I was a person that was putting forth policy on climate change, or if I was a person that put out my opinion publicly on climate change, I would do all of that. I'm just not, because I don't.
But why you say you don't believe in it?
Because I just personally, if you,
how about not have a belief until you really
okay? So you would prefer if my language, as opposed to admitting that I do not know this, I wouldn't die until I've never made a video, I've never made a public statement. You would have preferred if I had just started by saying I have no opinion.
No, I don't know.
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. You say I don't.
I said I didn't know.
You say I don't believe in it.
Yeah,
I don't believe in it. You're saying really clearly that you don't think it's real.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it would be the same if I said to you, like, do you believe in God? Right.
No, I would say I don't know.
You would say so. That's this. I feel like this is sort of like linguistics, though.
No, I would say I don't know. Okay. I always say I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm agnostic.
Most people say like I believe it or I don't. Right. So it's like if you say,
I think a lot of people say they don't know.
Okay, I think believe is definitely a word that's associated with God. But
right.
So if I say like, but if you say I don't believe in God, and then somebody starts saying, oh, you need to form it, it's like I just don't believe in it.
No, you don't, because God is not scientific data.
Right.
There's a big difference between measuring the CO2 levels in the atmosphere and deciding whether or not there's an afterlife.
Right. I'm sorry that I just don't believe in global warming.
Political commentators are disincentivized and wired to not say, I don't know, because when you're expected to speak on such a wide range of complex topics, you have to try and present yourself as a Renaissance person. And I'm not saying a realistic Renaissance person who knows, 3 areas really, really well. They're trying to present themselves as someone who knows almost anything about everything, which is not humanly possible. They're so robot. I don't know is scary territory in their minds, so they pick a stance, tap into their acting skills, and speak as confidently as they would on any other subject. It's deceiving, but to everyone listening, trust me, being comfortable saying I don't know is actually a flex. We're reaching the end of the journalism section, and as alluded to throughout, there are a wide array of media roles, and none of them are synonymous. For example, journalist, commentator, reporter, analyst, pundit, news anchor, correspondent, columnist, educator, creator, influencer, and more. A media personality can practice multiple of these, but it's important to recognize when they're tapping into each one, because when it comes to a full body of work, for example, a current event segment, they can't necessarily simultaneously tap into some of these because they would be in conflict with one another in principle. But back to the Code of Ethics. The Society of Journalists encourages the use of the 4 principles by all people in all media. I'll do a separate video in the coming weeks breaking down the difference between these media roles, but in today's video, we're focused on the journalism comparison. Now, let's dig into podcast positioning because it is all super interesting. First, let's recognize that there are actual journalists who have podcasts, and they prioritize those 4 principles every time they publish. Like under the term podcaster, there's always at least one of those more specific media roles that can be attributed to a host. But shows solely based on journalism without a layer of commentary don't really do it for people. And within the independent media ecosystem, it is really hard to sustain yourself doing that. Here's a comment on one of my TikTok videos last year that perfectly sums up our consumer habits. LOL, these nuanced both side takes are boring and uninspiring. Take a stand. I can't remember what video this was on. I just remember I had tweeted it, and in the tweet I was like, I wasn't even saying any takes. It was an education-based video to give people information. People say they don't want to be told what to think, but I think a lot of the time they actually do. They just want it to be more subtle. In the same way people rely so much on comment sections before they even consume something in full to help them form their opinion, people like being told what to think. Anyway, to pinpoint the rise of podcasts, let's start with a word from Tucker Carlson, who is often within the top ranks of the podcast charts and has actually stated before that he's not a journalist, he's a commentator, which people often get mixed up because, he was suited up on the news, would talk about how he taps into principles of journalism, as we all do at times. But yeah, he stated himself that his work has been much more about opinion than thorough reporting, so let's see what he recently shared about the origins of podcasting.
I just want to say one word about Rogan. I've been in the media, as I said, my whole life. Rogan was like a sitcom actor and a stand-up comedian and like an MMA fighter. Okay, so he starts this thing called a podcast where he talks for 3 hours. I'm in television at a big network, and I'm looking over at this being like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No one's going to listen to a 3-hour podcast from some MMA fighter. I know, right. And this guy's not even in our business. What's he doing? He completely changed not just American media, but American history. He created a whole new, it would be like this one guy invented the newspaper or television. That's how big what Rogan did was.
This is a talking point about today's media landscape that he's pushing in various settings.
Joe Rogan for basically single-handedly inventing a brand new genre called podcasting. Joe Rogan did that.
And while Joe Rogan's impact and influence on the podcasting space is undeniable, the seed was actually planted in his head by his friend, Tom Green.
I found that clip from when you came up to my house back in the day. And I saw this moment where we started talking about my old web show and you'd come up to my house back in the day. And I remember at the time, your website was way advanced, right? It had all sorts of extra stuff on it that people weren't really doing on the web back then. And you came up and we just started talking about the web. You said, what we got to do is figure out how we're going to make some money off this. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm going, yeah, I know. I'd been trying. I'd been going to, advertisers and saying, they were like, what? What do you mean the internet, But it's kind of funny. I saw that clip. I thought that's hilarious because, not to blow too much smoke up your ass, but clearly you figured out how to make money off of it, and it was hilarious. I'm like, that's hilarious and prophetic moment. How can we make money off of it? Now we're here in this beautiful studio.
Yeah, there was
incredible.
A few moments that really planted a seed in my head to do something like this online. Yours was a big one.
Yeah.
Dude, you were so ahead of everybody.
That's actually a little later. Actually, I'm looking at this now. This is later. This is after.
Anthony Cumia had a kind of a pretty high-tech setup in his basement.
Yeah.
That was another inspiration.
Tom Green had more of an independent talk show approach from the start, which is certainly what we've seen podcasting become today, a mix of radio shows, TV talk shows, and so on. But the origins of podcasting were earlier than 2009 when Rogan launched his show. While there's some debate, it's most commonly cited that in 2001, Dave Weiner prompted a technological breakthrough that allowed an audio file to be attached to an RSS feed. In 2003, Radio Open Source was an interview podcast released by Christopher Liddon, which Dave Weiner helped publish. In 2004, Weiner began collaborating with Adam Curry, who's credited with creating a software known as iPodder that pulled audio from an RSS feed and synced it to an iPod. Curry ended up launching his own show called The Daily Source Code, where he discussed his everyday life, events in the podcasting scene, or news in general. Regarding the actual term podcast, it's most frequently cited as being coined by Ben Hammersley in a Guardian newspaper article in February 2004. Let's watch this clip of Steve Jobs talking about podcasts in 2005 at the All Things Digital conference.
How many of you know what how many of you heard of podcasting?
Let me start at the beginning and tell you what this is all about. Podcasting is a word that's concatenation of iPod and broadcasting, right? Put together podcasting. And what podcasting is, it's started off as Wayne's World for radio. Think of it that way, right? Where you've got anybody could make a radio show and put it on the internet and broadcast it out there and anybody else could listen to it. And then what you could do is, because people like to put out multiple episodes of their radio show, you could subscribe to a radio show, and every time it's updated, you'll get the update right on your computer, and it'll go into your iPod when you sync your iPod, right? Pretty cool. Then, what's happened since is that it's not just the Wayne's World of radio, but real radio is jumping onto this. It's getting very, very exciting. Let me read you some stats. I have a little thing over here with some. First of all, there was a Pew survey done last month. 29% of U.S. iPod users had listened to a podcast. Not necessarily subscribed to one, but listened to one. And there's over 8,000 podcasts today. It's kind of interesting. There's no FCC regulation because you're not using Spectrum. You're using the internet, so that makes it very simple. It's worldwide. You can put your radio show out there, and anyone in the world can listen to this. And if you Google podcast, 6.2 million entries in Google on podcasting, which is kind of fun. So again, it's sort of like TiVo for radio for your iPod. You could try to sell podcasts, but the whole phenomenon is so great it's free. Okay. And I think what we're going to see is an advertising-supported model emerge, just like free radio. Here's another. Adam Curry is one of the guys that invented podcasting. And he has a podcast called The Daily Source. Let me go ahead and subscribe to that. And we can go listen to his latest one. Just click on it.
Your daily source code, show number 180. Something remarkable is happening here. Radio is springing free of the regulated gatekeepers who've managed what you can hear since radio was invented. It's jumping into the hands of anyone at all with something or nothing to say.
To bring it back to the different points we're making throughout this video, does Tucker Carlson crediting Joe Rogan for the start of podcasting hurt anyone? No one's going to die from it, but it is irresponsible and disrespectful to the true origins of podcasting. And he's someone who loves history, like I net like Rogan, but Tucker compared him to the people who invented the newspaper and television. This really is a necessary point to make because we're talking about the relationship between podcasting and journalism. Tucker is one of the people at the forefront of this shift, but he has this view on the information landscape.
What advice would you have on what to listen to, where to get diverse or accurate, non-propagandized sort of education?
It's pretty hard. I mean, I've gone so crazy, and obviously I wouldn't recommend this to other people, but I don't read any news at all, ever, period. I don't read any of it. I was in it too long. I know how poisoned it is. It's like watching sometimes you meet nurses who are the most honest people in hospitals, in my experience. And they'll tell you, like, oh man, don't get any, cardiac catheter at that hospital. They'll kill you. You should probably believe the nurse, like she works there. And that's how I feel about media. Like I know how it works. And so I don't read any of it. I get all my information from people via text message. I travel a ton to see things firsthand because there's no replacing that. But the advice that I give my own children on this question is go with your gut. Like, I actually think we have a much more accurate sort of internal measuring system for truth than we understand. Like, when someone's lying to you. You're born with that ability to discern truth from lie. Now, it's unerring, but it's imprecise. In other words, if I feel someone's lying to me, that person's lying. Like my dogs know. Like if you show up at my house and you're creepy, my dogs have no idea what you're saying. They don't need to know. They know you're creepy, and they'll snarl at you. And then I know you're creepy because my dogs have already vetted you. All of it. No, and I mean it. And you're not welcome for dinner at that point. I don't know what you did, but it's gross.
His text messages, traveling, gut, and dogs couldn't help him get the origins of podcasting right. Today, podcasting is probably best described as a program made available in digital format for download over the internet. Typically, a podcast is an episodic series of digital audio files that users can download to a personal device or stream to listen to at a time of their choosing. Podcasts are primarily an audio medium, but some distribute in video, either as their primary content or as a supplement to audio, popularized in recent years by video platform YouTube. Of course, a monumental moment for podcasting in recent years were the exclusive deals Spotify did with personalities like Joe Rogan, Alex Cooper, Emma Chamberlain, and more starting in 2020. But in 2025, just about all of these shows have made their way to publishing on YouTube again as well. So the format's cultural relevance is just becoming that much greater. But if the quality of information can often be subpar and the format can be so long, what makes podcasts thrive? Let's break down why the format is alluring from 3 different perspectives: that of the hosts, the guests, and the consumer/audience. Under each of these 3 buckets, I have 4 points. Starting with the hosts, first we have low barriers to entry. This was especially true when podcasts were mostly audio only, but has become less true as video feels more essential to the landscape. Still, the editing that goes into podcasts is far more stripped down and minimal than something like a deep dive, so it's much easier for creators/hosts to tap into podcasts as a medium. Second, podcasts are alluring for hosts because of the consistency. Again, video production can be a fucking beast. The reason someone like Ethan Klein of H3 abandoned making creative videos on his original channel to focus on his podcast channel is because, as this person on Reddit mentioned, the original style was extremely time-consuming and they were broke. So, in order to survive, Ethan tried to make a ton of videos, but they ran out of ideas and the process was too exhausting. Every detail thought out, hours of research and planning, lots of cutting out material that doesn't reach standards. They talked about it a few times. They considered quitting everything because it was so intense that they couldn't keep going. It made Ethan so stressed that he didn't like the channel around 2018 and they just left before Ethan went wild. I think Ethan is still traumatized by that phase of being forced to crank out high-effort videos constantly to survive. Now, they figured out a way to rely on the podcast mostly and just wait for times when a nice idea naturally comes. When you need to make money and you're someone drawn to working in media, the nature of creativity, the nature of actually thorough work, doesn't align with the rat race that the attention economy can be. But today, the perception of the average podcast is that they're like sitting in on a natural conversation between people or a natural-sounding rant from an individual. This precedent allows for hosts to put out media/content much more consistently than if the perception of podcast leaned more towards what we view as the effort behind producing something like, a short story, a book, a documentary, a TV show, movie, you name it, obviously. Third, under host, we have deeper audience relationship. Because of the consistency and length of podcast, it's just a correlation. Listeners are likely going to feel a deeper connection to a host than if they didn't listen to it. A deeper audience relationship is, of course, beneficial to the career of the host. And lastly, for the host, we have more of a clear path to monetization.
If you could only be on one platform right now, what would it be?
From what perspective? Making money?
Making money.
Making money, podcasting.
Podcasts can be more lucrative than other media formats because it's not odd for there to be multiple integrations with multiple partners coming directly from the host within a single episode. The audience does not bat an eye with this, but tends to or would with other media formats. Also, podcasts are just where the culture is right now, so subsequently, it's where the culture is right now, so subsequently, I think, are where advertisers want to be. Now, moving on to why the guests find podcast alluring, starting with optionality. Something I had replied to the New York Times journalist was, those in powerful positions now have a wide array of options to choose from when they want to get the word out to the public. But with more options to choose from, they can go to where it's maybe less critical and instead more comfortable. The optionality of an increasingly fragmented ecosystem creates this opportunity for all public figures, or anyone who is having coverage on them within a moment. In Charli XCX's song, I Might Say Something Stupid, she mentions how these interviews are so serious, in a way that's like, why? And I agree that for entertainers, the hard-hitting journalism approach isn't always necessary, and podcasts often end up being a better fit.
I definitely don't want to feel like I'm just like coming in and like taking over and being like, And again, I know there's like incredible journalists and stuff. I think the celebrities go to me because I'm not a journalist. Like,
well, it gives an opportunity for us to see a different side of them.
Yeah.
Same thing with Funny Marco.
Yeah, exactly. And Funny Marco gets like amazing guests. Like, he just got Kevin Hart, and I love Kevin Hart, and I'm so like, good. He's great.
But with all that being said, again, now people in power can also avoid uncomfortable conversations that could be really valuable for public interest, knowledge, and development. Something else I replied to the New York Times journalist was, podcasts serve a valuable but different purpose than standard journalistic interviews. Unfortunately, it seems companies and those in power may think that doing a podcast means the responsibility of public interviews is completely checked off the list, when in reality, they should consider that another pillar has been added to the list. They should still engage with standard journalistic interviews as well. The leaders of tech companies have an increasing role in government they owe the public increased communication through various formats. Second is a slightly different point, but also continues to build on the previous. Podcasts lean towards friendly.
This was the podcast election, but none of these podcasts were adversarial. And you don't expect them to be. No. I don't expect Alex Cooper to all of a sudden turn into an adversarial journalist. That's not what it is. It's like an endorsement when she has Kamala Harris on.
Hammering in the point that what journalists are supposed to get out of their media endeavors is uncovering truth and holding power to account. But what public figures tend to want out of their media endeavors is good PR, which, you can't blame them, whatever. That being said, moving away from journalists definitely secures a higher chance of that.
Every time I look around, you're hanging with Trump on the plane, you're at a UFC fight, you're golfing with him, he's on your podcast. Did he adopt you?
I think we're pretty much adopted at this rate, honestly. We're like a great grandchild at this point.
In the past, public figures had limited options for publicity and had to talk to the core set of journalists and media personalities to be widely seen and heard. These journalist and media personalities had room to be more daring with their questions because of how secure their spot within the landscape was. But with today's optionality, getting written off as an interviewer is much easier. Because once you're in that position, it's more fragile in terms of access. It's important to understand that the same is true of independent media that Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman deemed true of mass media when it comes to one of the 5 filters: sourcing. Reliance on official sources can discourage journalists from challenging sources too strongly because they risk losing access.
Katy Perry was on the Call Her Daddy podcast, and she was asked about people being disappointed that she worked with Dr. Luke. And she gave the most non-answer answer of all time. But in typical Call Her Daddy fashion, there was no follow-up question. And I will say, I think that people are scared of the backlash from fans, that they don't ask the questions, and they also do not have degrees in this. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, I don't know.
And exactly to their point, 2018-2019 Rogan energy was not present in his 2024 conversation with Donald Trump. Meaning, something Rogan did when growing his podcast was create an environment where guests actually anticipated and welcomed pushback in, like we very much saw in that 2018 clip with Candace Owens. But despite Rogan having talked a lot of shit on TikTok, some of which I definitely agree with, none of that was brought up when Donald Trump started to boast about how the app was helping his campaign, despite Trump being the one to initially push for a ban in 2020 of the platform in the US.
I'm on TikTok now.
Congratulations.
And I've done really well. No, but the crazy, have you seen the numbers? Billions of hits. It's crazy.
I'm sure. TikTok's a wild application.
And I've gone up 30 points. A Republican is always down 30 with young people. I'm plus 30. And I'm on TikTok.
I think
it's had a huge impact.
Young people are rejecting a lot of this woke bullshit. Young people are tired of being yelled at and scolded. They're tired of these people that they think are mentally ill.
It was this moment in time where there was pressure to not say anything negative towards the candidate you support because the outlook was that all it could do is potentially move voters away from them. So, yeah, Rogan kept it moving. Meanwhile, to a journalist, in principle, that would be the most necessary follow-up. And yes, legacy media incentives have the potential to create filtered and deceptive end products or just completely ignore things altogether, similarly to what Rogan did. But people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk often use that potential to deem any type of criticism from legacy media journalists as fake news. And so, of course, the friendly, comfortable nature of podcast is embraced by people in power. Third, under guest, we have more context. In that Charlie XCX song, I might say something stupid. Some other lines around that interview point are, "Now I'm watching what I say. These interviews are so serious. My friends went through this before, yeah. It happens to lots of guys." And in her song Sympathy is a Knife with Ariana Grande, she says, "It's a knife when a journalist does a misquote." She's referencing this phenomenon where journalists, especially for text interviews, will cut things out from a conversation that don't end up relating to the narrative they decide to go with. And this is not inherently bad. It's just that a journalist will spend a duration of time with someone, sometimes spend an entire day with them, and it doesn't make sense to publish all of the dialogue that happened, especially through text. It's like part of the job of a journalist is, to curate information, pull things out, make it as concise as possible, make it as digestible as possible, and make sure that the consumers are getting value for their time. But as humans, We all have different minds. We all have different tastes. We're drawn to different things. We interpret things differently. And how a journalist interprets something could be completely misaligned with what the interviewee meant, and consumers don't have the surrounding context to make that out. But podcasts and streams are very straight up. And again, while comment sections and internet commentary at large are not arbiters of truth, there's a higher chance for the truth to prevail over time when it comes to interpreting something someone said, because it and a good amount of surrounding context are literally there in 4K. Though I do want to note somewhere, I think this is the perfect spot, from a guest perspective, interviews can be fucking scary. For example, I know some of you comment sometimes that I'm well-spoken or whatever. That's because I write a lot for my work, and writing is a certain type of thinking that is very helpful for making sense of your ideas. When it comes to off-the-cuff interviews, sometimes I leave those and I'm like, what the fuck did I just say? I didn't even mean that. And I didn't mean that as if I was like lying about something. It's just like mind-to-mouth expression can be very hard, and especially like when you don't know what you're getting asked and there's the pressure of time and all this, you're just like, you fuck up, right? So I do think that always giving people grace in those situations is a good thing. I definitely vouch for that. Lastly, under guest, we have more ownership. Related to the Rogan-Trump TikTok thing, it's a little bit of pushback on the point that podcasts provide more context, because context also gets removed due to the friendly, comfortable nature of them, plus a lack of rigor. Like, let's check out this clip from Alex Cooper of Call Her Daddy.
And even sometimes, like, I'll say this. I've had some people say just like some out-of-pocket, like rude shit on the podcast, and like I edit it out sometimes.
I would. I'd be like, this is my podcast,
no,
bitch.
And also just because literally, because also sometimes I've been like, this is going to make you look really bad. And like, I'm going to choose to believe you didn't mean to say that. But like,
oh, well, that's nice of you.
I don't know why I do that sometimes. Like, no one asks me to, but I'll just be like, that is like, or like, that's so out of touch. Like, why did you say that? And I'll just be like, clip. And it will be like a little statement.
Yes.
I've had people that I'm like,
that is wild.
Girl.
So this example wasn't prompted by the guest, it was prompted by Alex Cooper, the host. So the point of more ownership could also fall under host and just independent media at large. But as Alex alluded to, she would not be opposed to a guest suggesting she remove something out of it.
I never put anything out there that the guest is uncomfortable. I think that's why I also become friends with. It's not something where I'm trying to catch anyone saying something. I'm never going to try to go viral off of somebody saying something. I know how uncomfortable it can be going on other people's podcasts or doing interviews where you have no control over it. And
I know you signed that release of ours.
I didn't sign anything, actually.
I'm just kidding.
But I know how uncomfortable it can be, so I try to be very okay. I don't know. You do whatever part you want to take out. If you want to take out all of it, whatever you want to do,
make the person feel comfortable.
Yeah, so they know when they go in that they can be free to do whatever they want, because they can take out anything they want to. And that means, even if that means they're like, I don't like how I said yeah right there, or I don't like how I looked like this, I'm like, all right, we'll cut it. I will sit there and make sure that everything that they want.
This girl on TikTok has a related critique, actually using Call Her Daddy as the example of a typical podcast interviewer versus journalist.
A real interview with a real journalist who went to school, who studies this, who's been doing this for years and years and years, would be like, oh, there's been a lot of controversy because Dr. Luke accused of X, Y, and Z, and you collaborated with him for a song about female empowerment, woman empowerment. And when she gave a non-answer, you're not answering my question there. So a real journalist would be like, okay, but why did you decide to still continue the work with Dr. Luke? Did you know about these accusations when you decided to say yes? And then that's when maybe, a publicist would be like, you can't ask her that. But real journalists would still put things into an interview where they don't get an answer, where a publicist interrupts them, where they, ask something and get a vague answer. They would have follow-up. They would have something to say. But on these podcasts, there's nothing to say. They literally just move on to the next question.
Especially her last point about how journalists would include the context of a non-answer or something like a publicist stepping in. It's very true. But again, Alex Cooper did not set out to be a journalist, and by what we saw in that clip, she doesn't want to be in that type of position, at least as of right now. This is just an aspect of our current media reality to be aware of, and if consumers want more truth uncovered, our attention is the most powerful currency today. So you have to be like, look, if you're going to go on XYZ type of show, I'm not going to pay it any mind, not even a hate watch, not even a hate post. Okay, now let's go to the 4 points for why consumers find podcasts alluring. First, we have variety in how and when they can be consumed. This one is super straightforward, but because visuals aren't expected within podcasts by default, you can listen to podcasts while working out, doing chores, commuting, so many things. There's just a lot of opportunity to tap into them as a medium, which is obviously huge. Second, we have variety in topics. Fox states, weekly or even daily discussions that fold in news and politics with pop culture, sports, self-help advice, and personal stories are how nearly a third of America keeps up with current events. In 2023, a Pew Research Center report found that about 2/3 of American podcast listeners hear news discussed on their shows, even if it's not the main reason they listen. It's almost like our phones have made our information landscape feel somewhat like a simulated version of ADHD, so it's no surprise that having our focus bounce around a lot feels like a norm. But also, such a wide variety in topics is more like what you'd experience in conversation with people offline. So with the growing loneliness, or at least isolation stats, seeking that type of dialogue in podcasts adds up compared to a more intentional relationship when seeking out current events in the past. But that's just my opinion. Pre-social media people, feel free to chime in the comments, or anyone. Third, under consumers, we have vulnerability and authenticity.
What advice do you have to people that want to become influencers? Like, obviously you worked really hard at it and you said you're doing those goals, 10 videos plus a day. Like, what advice do you have?
Be consistent and be vulnerable. I feel like that still remains true for a lot of people I see blow up, but they're just really authentic. And yeah.
Podcasts are much more personality driven, while journalistic interviews are supposed to have the information be the focus full stop. Sometimes who the information is coming from inherently adds a personality layer, but still. And a lack of personality is dry to consumers. It's too robotic. So we're tempted to instead go where we feel a fuller range of emotions, dopamine hits, and a sense of connection via parasocial relationships.
I'm in this lane now and it's working now because this sounds weird, but I feel like I'm the most authentic to who I genuinely am that I've ever been. You know, when I was on air at Fox, I don't want to say I was playing a part, but I sort of had an image of what a news anchor was supposed to be. And that's what I was trying to be. I wasn't really trying to be Megyn Kelly. And then you find yourself on your own and it's your business and it's your show entirely. And lo and behold, slowly but surely, you arrive. You know, the real you arrives. And then you really find out whether you've got a connection with your audience or you don't. You know, so far, so good.
Donald Trump captures attention and keeps it on himself in a way that no other president in history has, for better, for worse. What advice do you have for Democrats about how to get heard and reach people in this digital age?
Get Trump-like. What I mean by that, Tom, is be your real, true, authentic self, for better or worse. Can you genuinely tell me, as a person who covers this stuff for a living, that Trump surprises you? What? No. Think about how he acts. Think about the things that he says. And then he goes and he tries to do it, for better or worse.
All right, y'all. A few things must be said. Let's start with that Megyn Kelly clip. She talks about how since she's gone independent, she feels like she can finally be her authentic self within her reporting and on camera, which, great. I want people to be themselves. Love that. But she talks about her time at Fox, and she is hesitant to say that she was like playing a part. She feels like that's a negative thing to say. When in reality, that is not negative. As we talked about in the very beginning of this video, journalism goes against our human nature. Journalism goes against our authentic selves, and that is not in a negative way. It is a disciplined role. It is a selfless role. It's a role that within our current economy, information ecosystem, and so on, it's a vital role. And yeah, you are playing a part. You are playing a character a bit. You are like switching into a certain type of identity. So I don't think she should be hesitant in saying that. I think if you claim to be a journalist, you should be proud to say that and say, that is not me 24/7. That is me when I am working. Journalism is work. I came across this comedian last year, and I'm sorry if you saw me post this anywhere else. Like, it just really stuck with me, where he was like, your authentic self is not your best self. Like, on social media, everyone is so obsessed with pushing, be authentic, be authentic. It's like, your authentic self wants to be eating potato chips in some sweats, lounging around on the couch. You need discipline. And to be frank, if Megyn Kelly still wants to call herself a journalist, every time I've tuned into her show the past few months, that's the message she needs. Girl, you need more discipline. And then we got Stephen A. Smith pointing out how if you want Trump-like power, in its current form. You need to garner Trump-like attention, which requires Trump-like authenticity. That fucking word. Authenticity is a beautiful word. I love tapping into authenticity, but let's bring in the word discipline, because without that, our information ecosystem, landscape, and so on cannot thrive. Maybe AI can help there at some point, but that's not where we're at right now. All right, moving on. Last point under consumers, world building and feeling in on something. One of, if not the biggest appeal of podcasts, is an appreciation for individuals coming together. As Colin and Samir mentioned here, there's something very culturally powerful about seeing someone get into a familiar setting.
I actually think Rogan's set is one of the most familiar looking sets.
Totally.
Right. It is just one of the most familiar looking sets. And to see him there was kind of jarring. It is kind of like back in the day watching like your favorite sitcom and like a celebrity cameo happen.
Yeah.
You're like, what are they doing in the Friends coffee shop?
And this effect has always been somewhat true of interviews, even when the interviewer has been a journalist. But it's especially true ever since consumers have put more of an emphasis on video over text. For example, on TV, when people would see Charlie Rose interview someone. He's a journalist, but really became a personality as well. But yeah, today we just see non-journalistic interviewers dominating the landscape, and with the added layers of being able to tap into collective commentary online and dive deeper into people's careers, lives, identities, it just makes that world building that much more intense for consumers. And we have to admit, it can be pretty fun. So, we just talked about what makes podcasts thrive among hosts, guests, and consumers. Now, aside from what's already been alluded to, let's discuss two critiques people have, not only about podcasts, but about this entire new wave of digital native shows as a whole. One, a lack of sincerity, and two, an emphasis on attention over truth, which seems obvious, is obvious, but there are really interesting points that people have to double down. All right, starting with a lack of sincerity.
Everyone going on Call Her Daddy, everyone going on Chicken Shop Date, everyone going on these shows, these entertaining things that have no real journalistic integrity to them, is just so frustrating because we will literally never get an answer to a question.
We're at a point where a musician who you know for music is being interviewed on a platform about music, talking in detail about music, his passion and what he's known for. And people are like, why does he keep doing that? But, if I was on here gossiping or talking about so-and-so who got beef, oh man, people will feed into it. And it's like, no, we need to get back to talking about music. We need to stop fucking going sneaker shopping or fucking deep-throating hot wings for an hour. Talk about your album, talk about music, talk about the 15 songs that you guys have spent time to get mixed and mastered and put your heart into and produced and did all this thing.
Similarly, singer-songwriter and producer Ethel Cain went to Tumblr to express her frustration with this. Let's pull out a few lines. I just feel as though there's a lack of sincerity in the world these days. Now, don't get me wrong, I love to laugh, I love a good joke, and I love lightheartedness as much as the next person, but it feels as though it's a common occurrence these days to take a pinch of something with a lot more weight to it, often a humorous bit, and then run with it. She talks about how people and topics increasingly get turned into caricatures. It's everywhere and it's inescapable. No one can be serious for even 2 seconds. Adding on to these outlooks, the lack of sincerity is a snowball effect from the fear of being deemed corny, cringe, or becoming a meme online. Humor has become a shield, especially because we've been online long enough now to really grasp how the internet is forever. And as humans, we evolve, we change. And it can be really psychologically weird to not only see, but be held to the same outlook or passion you had for something at one point when you no longer align with that version of yourself anymore. So just in case that happens, it's like, let me make everything I post somewhat of a joke so I can be like, oh, it's never that serious. And therefore we have a lack of sincerity and people playing it very safe. And yeah, the decline in sincerity and the decline in journalism are actually pretty intertwined because they deal with some of the same consumer priorities needed for them to thrive, like truth over entertainment sometimes, thoroughness, caring, being a bit of a tryhard, that realm of things. Which goes into the next critique, an emphasis on attention over truth, which we're in the attention economy, but we'd be remiss not to cover it. Let's watch some clips that showcase Alex Cooper's mindset towards her work.
I mean, I always want to listen to my audience. Like, I'm never someone that's just like, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to do what I want. Like, I have literally built my entire brand off of going in lockstep with my audience. With that said, I think it's normal to have people question things that I'm doing, but I also am like, a view is a view, and it's okay if it's a hate view or a like view. I just look at it like, if they're talking about it, I'm making noise, I'm creating conversation, and that's all I want to do on Color Daddy. So I think I did my job.
According to the American Press Association, the central purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with accurate and reliable information that they need to function in a free society. So, journalism's first obligation is truth, and then second, but above advertisers and shareholders, comes citizens and larger public interest. So what Alex says in relation to her audience somewhat taps into that, but ultimately, as she says, views and therefore profit are prioritized, meaning audience and advertisers are her first obligation as a top podcaster. In my 2023 interview with Taylor Lorenz, she offers solid insight into that slightly different relationship between attention and truth when it comes to actual journalism.
I'm not a supporter of the legacy media ecosystem as a whole. Even though I work in it now and it's given me a lot more empathy for it. I used to truly want to just destroy it. And now I'm like, okay, there is value because only at a place like the Washington Post or the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, do you have like months to investigate a story, and like you don't have to worry about views, right? You don't have to worry. You can like do these stories where there's a real public interest that can change. I mean, the Washington Post series on the AR-15 last year is a great example of this. Like that level of journalism that really affects legislation and can bring accountability. A lot of environmental reporting is the same way. Like it's never going to get the views on social. The social media business model is not built to support it.
But it's important to be out in the world.
It's so important because it's a check on corporate power. Now, I do think that the legacy media in general is way too aligned with corporate power. So they don't always do the check. Like they like to pretend that they are these amazing defenders of, whatever. They're not. A lot of the times they're also chasing clicks. They're bound by a lot of broken incentives. But I think we need it to exist. We just need it to be a little bit better. And we really need an independent media ecosystem.
She acknowledges that it's by no means a perfect system because these institutions ultimately need funding in order to survive. And as succinctly stated in a breakdown of manufacturing consent, media cost a lot more than consumers will ever pay. But with that being said, its positioning within today's information ecosystem is still differentiated in an important way, especially because institutional media still breaks, or at least comprehensively covers, most of the biggest stories. And your favorite media personalities essentially still get their information through them, whether that be directly or through a domino effect. Institutional media is still often the foundation. Moving forward, how can we make sure the current media ecosystem becomes better for rigorous information sources? We're just going to plant some seeds today because there will be comprehensive coverage to come, but 4 seeds. 1. Prioritize official stories for full context before diving into commentary content. Or, if you discover a topic through commentary content, because, we're often on our feeds just coming across things, put in that slight effort to simultaneously seek out and support the official story. 2. Support independent journalists, topic-based experts, and your preferred institutional journalists via your attention, engagement, and or subscriptions, even if you have to knock off an entertainment subscription. 3. Keep in mind everything we discussed today to become more of an active consumer, because our time and attention holds the power within media business models. And for now, lastly, 4, more public dialogue and brainstorming. Ideas like this one from Colin and Samir are great jumping off points.
There should be a democratic vote on the selected podcasters for the next election cycle. So we pick 5 or 6 podcasters. And they're like a healthy mix, right? There's like a healthy mix of those hosts. And then both candidates have to go on all.
Something like that makes perfect sense and could actually be taken seriously on a national voting level. So again, we need more ideas and brainstorms like these so that moving forward is exciting. Back to the stat we opened this video with, it was just reported that more than 1 billion people are now watching podcasts on YouTube every month. And while the sentiment is often, why does everyone have a podcast? To me, that's kind of like asking, why does everyone have an Instagram? And no one asked that. And look, it's not completely the same by any means. There's more nuances, but I do think it sways more that way than people realize. And when you think of it like that, you do realize that there's a lot of growing room within the industry. User Mag just published a story covering the MD Foodie Boys, a group of middle schoolers who have a podcast where they rate and review food. The piece states, the MD Foodie Boys are at the forefront of what I believe will soon become a Gen Alpha podcast boom. Gen Alpha, kids born between 2010 and 2025, are deeply immersed in digital technology and have never known a world without podcasts and interactive media. They're coming of age right when the barrier to entry for podcasting is at an all-time low, and podcast discovery is picking up as the industry shifts to video. Many of them have also grown up with podcasters playing a pivotal role in their media diets or the media diets of their parents. I thought it was notable how the MD Foodie Boys cited Joe Rogan and Theo Von as inspirations. We are living in undeniably fascinating times, and it's only going to get weirder, so buckle up. Holy shit, we're at the end of the video. This is my longest video ever, guys. And if you don't put time constraints on me, I will make a fucking history book. So I'm going to put time constraints on myself in the future. Thank you so much for getting to this point. I hope that this video helped you get a solid understanding of 1, what can be deemed journalism and who can claim to be a journalist. 2, the nuances of podcast positioning and culture right now. And 3, compartmentalizing rigorous information sources versus entertaining information sources. And if you were wondering what I consider myself, no one asked. No. I guess my typical answer is a curator and analyst. I don't know. Nothing really hits. I don't really care to be labeled. I just am exploring my curiosities, what comes innately, what I'm like, oh my God, I have to talk about this. I have to dig into this. I have to research this. I have to share this type of information. That's what I do. But yes, I value and practice journalism within that. I think that's another takeaway when looking at the media ecosystem today, is that that's what people want to do. They want to explore their curiosities, make a living doing so, and we're all drawn to that. Because like I mentioned towards the beginning of the video, something like journalism is quite robotic. And for example, I know when I was posting on TikTok kind of solely my deep dives, it was weird when I would get DMs or meet people in person and their perception of me was just not correct identity-wise. That was like tough for me, like thinking I'm like super serious all the time, very, I don't know if diplomatic is the right word to use. And it's like, that is a facet of me that I tap into when I want to do like my most disciplined work, when I want to be sincere about these topics, when a fire is lit within me that I'm like, I need to share this type of information. I need to do the deep dive and publish it for people, but it's only a certain percentage of my identity. And the fact that our online lives incorporate so much documentation of our identity, for better or worse, but for better ways, like I'm excited for my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids to hopefully be able to see that. Like I want to share all of me online. So that was weird, really weird identity-wise. And I was like, I need to post more personality stuff because I want the perception of me to be correct. I don't want to feel like I'm hiding aspects of myself because as humans, we aren't serious all the time. But to Ethel Kane's point, to Tyler the Creator's point, we're going a little too much into the unserious, right? There needs to be a good balance. Thank you all so much for watching. Seriously, especially if you got to this point, can you let me know, like, that is so kind. I put in a lot of effort into these, so like I know by this point this was a valuable video, but like seriously, that is so kind. If you would like to monetarily support my work, you can do so by sending a super thanks on YouTube, becoming a paid subscriber on Substack, or through the Buy Me a Coffee platform. But most importantly, if you would just like to support my work more generally, follow @JulesTurpak and @FishbowlPod across all platforms, or of course, share my work with who you think it will be valuable to. I appreciate you all a ton. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.